For those who might not know, and we're a fairly intimate gathering, my name's Robin Jeffrey. I'm the chair of this afternoon's session, and I welcome this select gathering to what I know you're going to find is a fascinating presentation, because Ronojoy and Nalin and I have had a little bit of it at lunch, and we've got the privilege of someone who's particularly well informed about the place that would be the 6th largest country in the world if it were an independent sovereign state, Uttar Pradesh. The brief that we've given Dr. Anil Verma is to explain to us what happened in the UP elections that concluded early last month, just about a month ago. And he's ideally qualified to do that because he's both a man of Uttar Pradesh. He lives in the center of Uttar Pradesh and knows it well and the people who live there well, but he's also been an analyst of the data on UP elections and UP demography since 1999, and he's been part of developing a really sophisticated methodology for understanding election activity and election behavior in India. So it's a real privilege to have someone this well informed, both in the large-scale data manipulation, but also in the social nuances of a place as a result of living there. I think it's particularly important too to look at state politics. Uttar Pradesh in its own right merits attention simply because of its size and the fact that it is the fulcrum of India. But I think the state politics of India are especially important because we now see a tendency for the dramatic things in development terms happening at state level, and that states and their chief ministers are being particularly celebrated for being progressive, able to implement development schemes, one state being compared against another. And we also hear, of course, that state chief ministers are becoming overly powerful. It's a rhetoric that we heard 45 years ago after the death of Nehru, the notion that the Indian states were becoming larger than the Union of India itself. So the state governments, I think, have never been more germane for the question of where India goes in the future and how Indian economic activity goes in the future. So UP, as a state that hasn't realized its potential in the last 20 years, is of particular interest to us. Dr. Verma, I should say a little bit about him. As I've suggested, he's a man of UP, but also connected to the Center for the Study of Developing Societies in Delhi, and has been their representative in UP doing data analysis since 1999. He's traveled widely. He's been in, given papers at Harvard in Australia a number of times, but remains with deep roots in Uttar Pradesh. And I think that's what makes him, to me, particularly attractive as a speaker and an analyst of this place. What we're going to do this afternoon, our colleague Ronojoy Sen will talk a little bit about the state elections that concluded in India a month ago, put the various states in perspective, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Verma to talk about UP. So that's the lineup, and at the end, of course, there'll be questions, discussion, and a cup of tea at the very, very end. So I'll pass to Ronojoy for now, and then we'll go to Dr. Verma.
Thanks, Robin. I'll keep my comments very brief so as to allow the maximum time to Professor Verma to deal with the nitty-gritty and complexities of Uttar Pradesh. What I'll do is very quickly, in 5 minutes or so, lay out the national implications of the Uttar Pradesh election, as well as the 4 other states that went to election, Manipur, Goa, Punjab, and Uttarakhand. All elections are important at some level or the other, but the Uttar Pradesh elections was particularly crucial for the Congress-led UPA government because it was desperately shopping for allies ever since its largest coalition partner, the Trinamool Congress, which has 19 seats in the lower house of the Lok Sabha of Indian Parliament, was blocking major policy initiatives, as well as actually voting against the government at certain times in Parliament. So the 2 main players in UP, the Samajwadi Party, the SP, and the Bahujan Samaj Party, the BSP, respectively having roughly a little over 20 seats. The BSP with 21 seats in the Lok Sabha, and the Samajwadi Party with 23 seats. Both lend issue-based support to the UPA in Parliament. But the Congress was hoping that it could tie up with either one of them to form the government in UP, and as a quid pro quo, get that party's support in the federal coalition. This would have effectively ensured the marginalization of the Trinamool Congress and brought some stability at the center. But that, as Professor Verma will explain, was not to be. With the resounding verdict in UP against the Samajwadi Party, what it now means for the bigger national picture is a prolonged period of policy paralysis at the federal level, with little chance of big-ticket reforms in the medium term. The Congress, it seems, is now condemned to bargaining with very assertive regional parties for the rest of its term, making major reforms and policy decisions increasingly difficult. And we've had some examples of that in the very recent past. One was with the railway budget, where there was a hike proposed for passenger fares by the railway minister, who actually belongs to the Trinamool Party, but under acute pressure from the Trinamool Party chief Mamata Banerjee, that was rolled back. And the Congress could do little but acquiesce to the Trinamool's demands. Similarly, at around the same time, we saw the DMK, another ally of the Congress, pressing on the government to vote in favor of a human rights resolution on Sri Lanka. And the government did so, even though it meant upsetting a friendly neighbor. And we can foresee similar pushes and pulls on all these sort of major policy initiatives on the table, such as FDI in retail, reform in land acquisition, cutting the subsidy bill. All these big-ticket reforms are most likely to run up against allies who will have contrary views. For the Congress party itself, to separate it from the government, the UP result was meant to be a litmus test for, of course, for Rahul Gandhi and the Nehru-Gandhi brand. Rahul Gandhi had actually focused his energies for the last couple of years on Uttar Pradesh and had vigorously campaigned during the election campaign period. But despite his efforts, the Congress ended up winning only 28 seats out of 403 seat UP Assembly. So what is apparent is that the Nehru-Gandhi brand in itself is not enough to get Congress votes. And among other things, the UP result showed the lack of organization at the grassroots level of the Congress, which has gradually eroded over the years, and this is not a new story, as well as the lack of recognizable local faces which can draw votes. And this is true not just for UP, but for the other states as well. The Congress did win a fairly convincing victory in Manipur and a razor-thin victory in Uttarakhand. But these two victories wouldn't really give the Congress much solace. The loss in Punjab would be particularly galling for the Congress, though the margin of victory of the Akali Dal BJP combined was just around 2 percentage points. But this was the first time actually in Punjab that anti-incumbency had been backed. And this was an election that the Congress was widely expected to win. So that one would have really hurt Congress. A worrying statistics for the Congress is that the party on its own, without allies, actually now controls only 2 out of the 10 sort of major states in India which send, by major I mean the states which send 25 or more MPs to the lower house. And these 2 states are Rajasthan and Andhra Pradesh. And even in the latter state now, the Congress faces a rebellion because there's a breakaway outfit led by the former chief minister's son. So in Andhra Pradesh, it's in trouble too. So, the 2014 elections, that is when the Lok Sabha elections are scheduled to be held. As of now, the prospects look somewhat bleak for the Congress. The other story, of course, was the poor performance of the Congress's main rival, the BJP, which came a poor third in UP with 47 seats, down from their tally in the last elections. The BJP, of course, had more reasons to be cheerful since it actually convincingly won Goa and is now going to formed the government in Punjab as a junior partner, though, to the Shiromani Akali Dal. But overall, these elections could be seen really as a triumph of the regional over the national. Both the national parties really were in decline. This is, of course, not a new phenomenon of regional parties doing well, and it has sort of steadily gathered momentum over the last 2 decades. When the next elections are held, again, It's scheduled to be held in 2014. There is a probability that it could be held earlier. Though as of now, it seems there is no prospects of immediate polls. I think the Congress, of course, is not keen on immediate polls. Neither is the BJP. Some of the regional parties, like the Samajwadi Party and the Trinamool, would probably like early polls, but it looks like the Congress might sort of, the Congress-led UP might model its way through till, at least end 2013, early 2014. But whenever the elections are held, there is a probability of a non-Congress, non-BJP formation, what is sort of called the third front. It's often a non-starter, but this time, though there might be a real chance of some kind of a third front forming, if the Congress, both the Congress and the BJP don't have that sort of critical mass of seats, which is roughly around the 150 to 200 mark if you need to sort of attract allies. But we must also remember that people vote very differently in state elections vis-a-vis the national elections. So making predictions on the basis of these elections is perilous. And as you say, even a couple of weeks in politics, especially Indian politics, can be a very long time. Finally, I just wanted to point out that several analysts have made the point that this election result was a watershed verdict in that parties which spoke the language of development, spoke the language of aspiration, were rewarded. And the Indian voter sort of managed to rise above identity politics and showed great maturity, etc. There is some substance to this. Anti-incumbency has been on the decline over the last few years. But at the same time, I believe too much should not be read into this verdict. Lest we forget the Samajwadi Party, which has now come to power in UP, and Professor Verma will dwell on the nature of that electoral victory. The same party had a terrible record when it was in power from 2003 to 2007 with regard to law and order, and practiced the worst kinds of crony capitalism during that period. Again, in Punjab, the Akali Dal has returned to power, but it doesn't at all have a very good record on corruption. It's fairly brazen if you sort of look at the record. In Uttarakhand, again, it's interesting. The BJP brought back their former chief minister, who's a former army general, B.C. Khanduri, who sort of represented clean politics and was had a good image to revive the party's fortunes. But ironically, Khanduri himself lost his seat, couldn't win from a seat very contested. Only Goa was, one could sort of regard as a fairly straightforward verdict against corruption and poor administration. That can probably be seen as one verdict that was really a vote against poor governance. So what I believe is that the Indian voter, as they do always, voted strategically for whom they felt would serve their interests best. So in that sense, I don't think this was really a watershed election, as many are making it out to be. So I just end there and turn the floor over to Professor Verma.
Professor Verma will speak from the back of us, and then might move to the side so that we can manipulate the PowerPoint.
Friends, I am extremely grateful to the Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore, and to my colleagues and friends, Professor Robin Jeffrey and Dr. Ronojoy Sen, who gave me an opportunity to share whatever little bit of knowledge I have about UP and its elections. Actually, this election has been extremely, interesting for a variety of reasons. And the reasons were that it was very much eminent that a party might return to power whose record earlier was not very impressive. As Ronojoy just now, made a reference about Samajwadi Party's crony capitalism and poor doing on law and order. It was also a very interesting election because some of the major experiments that had been initiated in Uttar Pradesh 2007 by Mayawati government and BSP government, they were put to actually test. There was a lot of talk about social engineering and inclusive politics when Mayawati returned to power with the bang. And people were wondering whether she would be able to replicate the social engineering experiments of 2007 or not. So that was an anxiety, not only for the BSP, but for also other parties, because other parties, they were also trying to, emulate that social engineering model and the inclusive politics. So basically, most of the political parties, they have by now understood that without inclusive politics and the kind of social engineering that Mayawati attempted 2007, they would not be able to get to power. So there was a scramble for this kind of inclusiveness, and people were wondering, and that's why it was very unpredictable outcome, uncertain about the outcome. Nobody was actually sure about. There are certain elections. I have been into electoral studies for quite some time by now. But I was just sharing with Robin that this election, without a moment's thought, I would say the most uncertain, unpredictable kind of an election that UP had for a very long time. So this was one, and there are certain very important players, as you all might know by this time. But just for those who are not very familiar with the UP scenario, that there were certain players and some very important questions were posed to each and every player. There were 4 players, of course the Mayawati, who was the chief minister then and represented the Bahujan Samaj Party. The major question for the party was, as I just now mentioned, whether she would be able to replicate the social engineering experiments of 2007 or not. For Mulayam Singh Yadav and his son Akhilesh Yadav, they represented the most potential and important political party challenging Mayawati. They had actually lost very many seats, 46 seats to be exact, in 2007 elections without actually losing a single vote. So they were actually worried whether they would be able to retrieve those 46 seats which they had lost in 2007 elections, and whether their kind of an effort to replicate the social engineering model and inclusive politics model of BSP would actually work for them. So this was a question which they were asking and people were asking. So the third player was Rahul Gandhi, who is very well known in Indian politics and also outside. And he was also doing the same kind of thing, trying to be inclusive. And his inclusion was, or the Congress approach to inclusion was basically invading the Mayawati's bastion, that is the Dalit helmets in Uttar Pradesh, and for which Mayawati was highly, agitated against Rahul's endeavors whenever he was trying to visit Dalit helmets and make friends with them. So she was very unhappy because he was intruding into her constituency, she thought. Not only that, recently held parliamentary elections in 2009. The Congress did a very, very grand, story over there by winning a very good number of seats from a very small, share of seats earlier. Earlier, Congress had only 9 seats, parliamentary seats, but in 2009, they won about 21 parliamentary seats. So it was, and that too when their 6 sitting MPs lost. So this was a wonderful accretion of 18 new parliamentary seats in Uttar Pradesh in 2009, and rightly they thought that they are into the game back because their vote share was also up by around 10% in 2009. So 2009 was appointed to the Congress. The Congress was looking optimistic, very optimistic that they are going to do very well. And not only that, but Rahul Gandhi was making a lot of efforts in Uttar Pradesh so that the party is back on the roads, on the rails. And obviously, the last competitor was the Bharatiya Janata Party or the BJP, which was slightly in shambles, but which were trying to revitalize the party in Uttar Pradesh by certain gimmicks, and that, though unfortunately, did not work for the party. In this presentation, what I plan to do is that we would address certain questions which these people and their parties faced, and discuss the electoral impact on parties, and also try to discern certain major trends about which Robin was referring to, or Ronojoy also earlier. In doing this, I would be using two kinds of data. I would be using ECI data, about which you are aggregate data, which you are all familiar about, and also I would also like to share with you some of the survey data, which is a post-poll survey done by the CSDS, and I happen to be coordinator of that survey work in Uttar Pradesh. So, not a very detailed study of the data has so far been able to be done, but some of the initial responses and the data that I propose to share with you. Of course, some of you who may be interested in the how the data is generated. Just to share very briefly that we do a stratified sampling, and we take so far as the parliamentary constituency is the first layer, then we take the assembly constituency, then we take the polling station, and we take the respondent from the voters list. In doing this, we take the parliamentary constituency on a census basis. That means we are sampling from all the 80 parliamentary constituencies, and then we go by 25% sampling of the assembly constituency. We took around 101 assembly constituency, and in every assembly constituency we take around 404 polling stations, so that means around 404 polling stations, and from each polling stations we are selecting respondents. Of course, our target was around 7,000 respondents, but we oversampled so that we reach around some close to 7,000. We probably reached around 6612 respondents. So this is a brief. And what is interesting about the data is that the profile of the data, this is the profile of our sample respondents, and we have tried to match how they look in the census and how they look in the sample. So it's not a great mismatch. At some places, of course, there might be, but if you can have a look at the data, you can see that largely the broad categories, they are matching, and most of the findings in our, most of the share in the surveys profile matches the census profile. That is broadly, not exactly. Just to remind you that Uttar Pradesh had a very long election. Normally, you have one-day elections, and Ronojoy was making a reference to all 5 states, and in each and every state that he referred to, we had just one-day poll. It was only in Uttar Pradesh that you had a 5-day, 7-phased poll, and this 7-phased poll had a change in plan. In the original plan, this is the original plan, but due to local festival in India, Barawafat, this was changed, and slightly. The change was very interesting, and you can see that this is the first, it's a Ruhelkhand kind of a sub-region in Uttar Pradesh, and this was to go to the poll first, but it went to the poll last. So you can see that this was then, and the entire logistical pattern of the elections was phased elections were very interesting. That it moved this way, it moved from this and took a U-turn, and it moved like this. When I just tried to check up why it has happened, then probably it was due to the logistical arrangements, so the troop movements and a lot of police movement, required. So India, when you have a polling, day, it's not just a polling day, it's also a massive administrative, problem, a headache, lot of troop movement, lot of CRPF personnel moving. So you need a lot of movement, and that's why it was thought that if you have an election like this and this kind of a scenario, a cyclic order, then probably things would work better for the administration. And luckily, of course, there were no incidents of violence, etc. It was absolutely a peaceful election, so that was a positive thing for the entire, election commission. Just to very quickly share on the fact sheet, some of the facts you may like to know. That, of course, Robin was making a reference that UP would probably be the 5th largest country in the world after China, India, US and Indonesia. It has overtaken Brazil. So now we qualify to be virtually a 5th state in the world, not just a small Indian state. So this is it. But the important issue is that we have a massive electorate, 127 million electorate. and out of these 127 million, actually 75% actually voted, and this is the assembly constituency. And in this assembly constituency, there is a very interesting, fact of reservation. There are certain assembly constituencies which are reserved for the scheduled caste. Scheduled caste are the depressed classes. Some of you who might be familiar with the social profile of the Uttar Pradesh. So the state is the society of the state is hierarchically divided, and in the lowest echelon of the society, you have the Dalits, whom we call scheduled caste. They have been scheduled in the constitution. That's why they have been called scheduled caste. So these, for them, around 85 seats are reserved, and as you can say, the number of female candidates, that is our anxiety in India actually, basically, that the females are not very much into the politics. Probably I was inquiring Robin about how things are in Singapore here, so he was not also very happy about the Singapore situation, and this is all the situation most of the places. The women are, in spite of the fact they are in very big numbers, and this is a question which needs to be investigated by political scientists. Ronojoy would probably look at it more deeply, that why is it that women are taking to other professions but not to politics? Isn't politics a good profession in the days to come? So we have to actually look at it, but in India it's a very, very pitiable situation, that very little women, and this is very significant because at the third tier of the federal structure that we have now, we have three layers of federal structure: the union, the states, and the grassroots democracy, which we call panchayats and all. There we have 33% seats reserved for women. So by reservation, we have already given 33% women a chance to be represented in local institutions, parliamentary institutions, local, which we call panchayat and municipalities. But in the second and first year, the women representation is terribly poor, as you can see from this. Now, this is the beginning of our story, that how well we can analyze this election 2012. You can have a look at this election results in a comparative fashion, and you will probably find that the BSP and the SP, they are the major gainers and losers. Here you can see that BSP is losing around 126 seats, and exactly almost the same kind of seats the SP is gaining. So this is not very interesting finding. Other things are more important, because these seat gains, can tell you a different story, and you can think that SP is, has done something very big in Uttar Pradesh elections. But as I was analyzing the data, I was not very sure whether UP has actually, SP has done actually a very good thing in Uttar Pradesh, and probably I would understand that things are not settled down for SP for all times to come, or even for the next elections, because as you will just now see the data, the SP is, has achieved something for which it cannot be given good credit, and I'm referring to the vote share, to which I will recently come. But before we go into the entire, analysis of UP politics, I would like to have a look at this diagram. Because in Uttar Pradesh, most of the analysis is caste-centric, and therefore it would be good for us to have a brief, understanding of what is the caste profile, caste calculus in the state. And here you can see, I would start with this, the last. These two figures are taken from the census. The scheduled castes and the Muslims. They are census figures. That means they are reliable. We can rely on their percentages. So these, we can say that scheduled castes are 21.1%, and of course this is 2001 census, not 2011 census, 2001 census, and these two figures are absolutely confirmed. Regarding the middle caste, we have a middle caste whom we call the OBCs, other backward class. Now this OBCs, they are differently understood, because their census has been stopped since 1931. 1931 was the last census when the castes were actually counted. So since 1931 we had not the caste census in India, so we do not exactly know what are the caste percentages for the middle caste. We do not know what are the caste percentages for the upper caste. But then Certainly, it's not without any basis, but I have put it for you that the middle caste have different, references. They are 41% from the perspective of National Sample Survey Organization, but the Mandal Commission, which is very, popular and popularly known as the Mandal Commission, this put the data at around 52%. So it's a conflicting data, around 9% difference you can see. 11% difference you can see in this, and so we'll not enter into that. We'll just go by the, NSSO, reference, and we would understand that they would be probably 41%. And the leftover is, of course, the upper caste. So this is just the leftover. So you calculate all this, add up all this, and so 19% is left. But then we checked up that do we have the different, because when you study the data, then you have the Brahmins, Thakurs, Vaishyas and Kayasthas separately classified. So what is their breakup? And when we checked, we found that these data, some of the data they have been worked out by people who know the breakup within this 19%. So this is just to give you a profile of the thing. Now let's talk about the winner first, because that is the convention to talk about the winners first. So we'll talk about the winners first, and Mulayam Singh could not have time, better than this to crown his son Akhilesh with the chief ministership, who was riding the cycle of optimism, and about whom a lot of expectation has been aroused all over, because he is a technology savvy chief minister, young also, dynamic, and people have high hopes. And that is, especially so because his father, Mulayam Singh Yadav, whom you can see, the elder Yadav here, he was very much against English, he was very much against computers, he was very much against, modern things. So, yes, how a modern father, how a traditional father has, with a modern son, combination with work for Uttar Pradesh, this is, we are actually watching very impatiently. Now, coming to this real question. The real question is that most of us think that Samajwadi Party has done something very strange. And Samajwadi Party has actually won 224 seats. We need around 202 for absolute majority. So he has surpassed absolute majority and got around 224 seats. And this is supposed to be a very good doing and very good show by the Samajwadi Party. But I was looking at the data and I saw that the vote share was terribly low. It was just 29.15%, lowest since independence. If you look at the data on which a majority party or a majority government has been formed in Uttar Pradesh, you will find that this vote share is the minimum since independence. No government in Uttar Pradesh has been found on such a small share of vote. In fact, earlier Mayawati had a record of sorts when at 30%, 30.4%, she had the lowest vote share on which she was able to form a majority government in Uttar Pradesh in 2007. But the Samajwadi Party has virtually broken that record also, on the negative side of it, and on a lower vote share, 1.28% less vote share, and they have got this numbers. So the numbers might be deceptive. What I am trying to argue is that Mulayam Singh and Samajwadi Party might have won good seats, but should they be comfortable? Should they be feeling comfortable with this kind of a vote share? I would probably not like to suggest that they should be feeling comfortable. And why I would not be feeling that they should be comfortable? Because of this kind of social profile that they keep. This is the CSDS data, and based on the CSDS data, you can see that this is the 2007 elections. This is the 2007 assembly election. So let us first concentrate on this, and you can see that in 2007 they were not able to percolate to all and every social denomination. In at least 4 major constituencies, they had lost votes. Of course, in some they had gained votes, but in many they had lost votes. Now look at the 2012 thing. When you look at 2012 thing, you again find that Mulayam Singh Yadav and Samajwadi Party, they have exactly lost in 4 social denominations, though the social denominations have changed. So numerically, we find that the Samajwadi Party has not been able to reach each and every social denomination and not register vote accretions in each and every social sector. And in 4 social segments, they lost votes in 2007, and in 2012, 4 social segments, they have again lost votes. But what's big deal about this? The big deal about this is that they have gained accretions in certain social segments which are numerically very high. As I was telling you, that you can see that their accretions, in these 2 social segments, they have made a lot of difference. These 2 social segments. Why I am saying this? I am saying this because this is the OBC vote share, and OBC, as you have just seen, they form around 41% going by the NSSO sample size. So in this social denomination, you can see they had registered a massive 14% vote share, which has made a lot of difference. And the Jatavs, do you know Jatavs? In India, Jatavs are the basic constituencies of Mayavati, and they are, in another parlance, they are called Chamars. And Chamars are numerically very dominant and numerically, very large group within the scheduled caste. And here you see that again in that very small, very large segment, they have registered a very major accretion of 12%. So what I am trying to indicate is that the Samajwadi Party is still to win over all social denominations, but this time they have actually registered accretion or they have intruded into such domains which are numerically very large and where they have registered very good accretions so far as the vote share is concerned. So this is the reason probably that the Samajwadi Party, if you analyze, then you will probably find that this is the reason that they have done so well, because in spite of the fact they have still to reach each and every social denomination, but they have succeeded in reaching that social denomination which is numerically very large. Now, these are certain other things of interest that I have already mentioned, that they have not been able to do a perfect inclusive politics because they have still a long way to go, and lost votes in most of the sections which you can see that in these segments. There was a very interesting point that came to my mind, that Samajwadi Party has been basically known to be banking on the support of Yadavs and Muslims. They are their core constituency, Yadavs and Muslims. But here you can see that in both the Yadav constituency and in the Muslim constituency, the party has lost votes. This is something unusual. When you lose in your core constituency, you may gain in other constituencies, but you are losing your own home, your own foothold. So the Yadav is your foothold, the Muslim is your foothold, and there you are losing. So this is an interesting finding for me so far as the data was concerned. But once I further dug the issue deep down, that why Mulayam Singh has lost in the Yadav constituency, a very interesting answer came to my notice, and that was that Mulayam Singh or Samajwadi Party, wherever they had Yadav dominant constituency, normally they put up Yadav candidates. But what has happened, that this time other parties have also put up Yadav candidates there, and that's why in a constituency which is numerically Yadav dominant, there the other parties, they have been able to fracture the Yadav votes, and therefore in the overall vote share, when it has been come to our calculations, then we find that Samajwadi Party has probably lost. And this is probably true of the Muslim thing also, about which I will show you some data. Yes, another thing which is very interesting about Samajwadi Party is that it has intruded into the Mayawati's domain. And this Mayawati domain, you can see that they have got 16.2% Dalit votes, this is showing an accretion of 10.3% Dalit votes. So Dalits are basically, Mayawati says every Dalit has voted me. She is probably wrong. The CSDS data doesn't support that. And here we can see that she is not supported by, and not only that, within the Dalits, the hardcore Jatav, that is the Chamar segment, they have voted 15% voted on Samajwadi Party, which is an accretion of 12%. That means earlier the party was getting just 3% of the Jatav votes or the Chamar votes. It's a massive swing or massive inroad into the Mayawati domain. What came to our notice was that these people, the Samajwadi Party got actually Dalits and Jatav votes. They were actually not inclined for Samajwadi Party because Samajwadi Party and Bahujan Samajwadi Party, they are almost antithetical to each other. And therefore they were not willing to vote for SP or Mulayam Singh. They were actually voting, thinking of voting for Congress. But somehow the Congress candidates, as I was talking to Robin this morning, the Congress actually decided that it would lose the election probably and put up so bad candidates, that it was absolutely wasting your vote. In my own constituency, I know we had an outsider candidate. We do not know from where he came, what his name was. He was not campaigning. He was not coming to us. Why should we vote for you? So in fact, Congress probably ensured that it is defeated by putting, bogus candidates. And that's why this turned away from Congress. Otherwise, there was an undercurrent. As I will show you soon, there was an undercurrent. About Muslims also, Muslim is another constituency of Samajwadi Party, and as you can say, and it is very interesting that both Mulayam Singh after victory and Mayawati after defeat, they claimed that Muslims have voted very much for Samajwadi Party. CSDS data says no, this conviction is wrong. And why it is wrong, that you can look at the Muslim support for SP and you can say that Muslim support for SP has certainly gone slightly higher, but looking at from the assembly vantage point 2007, you find that they have actually lost 8% Muslim votes. But if you look the Muslim votes for SP from the 2009 parliamentary elections, then certainly you can say that they have gone by. So they have earned more 9% more votes. So Muslim support is, which was showing a decline during 2007 to 2009, was certainly took a U-turn, and this credit should go to Mulayam Singh. This I can show you by graph. That this you can probably very easily understand that how this graph looks. There was a decline and suddenly you find this incline. Now this graph should be quite clear to you. Now this is a graph in which a very interesting story, I have tried to develop. And the interesting story is that we checked up the Muslim populated constituencies. It's a constituency. We have 403 constituencies, and here we worked out and we plotted on this scale that what is the percentage of Muslims. So we took Muslim dominant constituency, which are 10% Muslims, then 20% Muslim, 30% Muslim, and more than 30% Muslims. And we checked up that what has been the vote share of Samajwadi Party. Now, very interestingly, you will probably think that if Muslim support for SP was higher, you will find greater Muslim support for Samajwadi Party in constituencies where Muslims are more dominant. There you find an inverse relationship. The higher the percentage of Muslims, the lower is the Muslim vote share for that. These are the data. You can't help it about anything about it, and that's why I found this graph very interesting for me. That higher the vote share, higher the percentage of the Muslims in the constituencies, you find the vote share of the SP declining. Again, we checked up why this is happening, and the answer was not very difficult to find out. And the answer was that in constituencies which are Muslim dominant constituencies and which have greater Muslim population, the tendency is for other parties to put up Muslim candidates, and there the votes get divided. So on overall share of the Muslim votes for SP, they go down. Now, so that was about the Samajwadi Party, and here you have that lady, that charismatic lady who made a lot of noise and a lot of history and a lot of visibility all over the globe. And of course, the riches are very self-declaratory kind of a thing, and claims of representing the poor. So a rich lady representing the poor, and this time probably the poor deserted him because they could see the riches and not the lady. So here you can see that BSP has been losing. The BSP has lost very heavily in terms of seats. As you can see, BSP has lost around 126 seats, and its vote share is down by 4.5%. Why this has been so devastating is because already in 2007, the vote share of the party was very fragile, which at 30%, as I already discussed, was the lowest ever vote share on which a majority government had been formed in 2007. And since independence, no majority government had been formed in Uttar Pradesh, on that small vote share. So this was already very fragile kind of a vote share, but somehow, when you have the first past the post system and the fractured mandate kind of thing with a lot of, political parties competing, then on such a small fragile vote share, you probably win. So this happened for this. But the losses to the BSP were spread evenly in each and every region, except of course the West UP, where here you can see a data of this kind, and here you can see that in every segment of the UPs, this is the regions, sub-regions, 7 sub-regions in which the UP is divided: Rohilkhand, Awadh, East UP, West UP, Doab, Bundelkhand, East UP. And in these regions, every region, you can say the BSP loss of vote share was, and the BSP lost seats in each and every region. The only region in which it lost not so decisively and did some better was the West UP. In West UP, you can see that the loss in vote share of the party was very minuscule. It was just 0.3%. But in every other segment of the state, you can see the party lost decisively. Now, there are certain very important questions which have to be raised to understand the entire, dynamics of loss of BSP in Uttar Pradesh this election. And these questions are like this: did Mayawati lose on inclusive politics? Has she failed on social engineering? Is her core constituency still with her? Or she has been deserted by the add-on groups. Add-on groups mean in the social engineering, she had a core constituency, Dalits, but in the social engineering, she tried to rope in people from outside the Dalit constituency, that means the upper class. So add-ons are, by add-ons I mean the upper class. Has she been able to rope in the, has she been deserted by the add-ons? Because once the BSP lost, Mayawati made a statement and she said that each and every Dalit has voted for me. So I am trying to show that the data of the CSDS would not support that. And of course, what about backward castes? Backward castes, they have also played a very important role, as we will see just now. And whether Muslims have actually failed BSP, because she has alleged that Muslims, they have voted en bloc for Samajwadi Party and not for BSP. So these allegations, are these allegations true or they are false? So let us have a look at the social profile of the BSP caste-wise. How I would like first you to look at the social profile of BSP 2007. This is the 2007 assembly elections, and as you can see by yourself, she had a perfect vertical social coalition in Uttar Pradesh. That means that we have a hierarchical kind of a social structure, and right from top to bottom, you can see in each and every social denomination, BSP banked. It had vote accretions. In not a single social group, you can see that she lost. In every social group, she has gained. Come 2012. Now in 2012 also, one is, initially inclined to say that probably she has lost on her social engineering and probably she has lost on the inclusive politics. But the data profile would not so much suggest, and that's why she is not out of reckoning. She is very much in, and the data would say that except two groups, that means most backwards, and the Yadavs, her own constituency, here the data contradicts Mayawati, and here you can find that she is not actually, her core constituency is not with her, and here you can see that she has lost in her core constituency. So you can question those who say that she has lost on inclusive politics. She is very much into inclusive politics, but somehow her own constituency she has not been able to keep fit.